To celebrate this upcoming NFL season, here is 30 minutes of NFL facts. In 2021, Cam Newton famously yelled, "I'm back." In the following NFL draft, the Panthers drafted these players. Pay attention to the first letter of each name. That's right, the first letter of each name spells "I'm back." The craziest part is that they were drafted in this exact order. Terry Bradshaw used the fake name of Tom Brady in 1983 to keep his surgery low profile and not make headlines. The real Tom Brady was only 5 years old at this time. In 2016, the Patriots had more starting quarterbacks than interceptions for that season. They had 3 different quarterbacks start that season, but only threw 2 interceptions. Out of all the quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame, only 2 share the same middle name, Johnny Constantine Unitas and Dan Constantine Marino. Tom Brady has more Super Bowl MVPs than he has losses to the Bills. He has 5 Super Bowl MVP trophies, but only lost to the Bills 3 times. He's 33-3 all-time against the Bills. Josh Allen was drafted 7th overall in 2018 and then drafted 7th overall in 2019. Josh Allen and Josh Allen are both 6'5", by the way. Did you know that during the 90s, Tom Brady was actually a middle linebacker for the Vikings? Well, Tom Brady, that is, but technically speaking, his middle name is Tom, so you can say that that was Tom Brady. Tom Brady has a higher win percentage in the playoffs when he throws 3 or more interceptions than Aaron Rodgers does when he throws 3 or more touchdowns. The Arizona Cardinals are older than the state of Arizona itself. The state of Arizona was founded on February 14th, 1912. The Cardinals were founded in 1898, making them roughly 14 years older. Before the Lions went 0-16 during the 2008 regular season, they actually went undefeated 4-0 during that very same preseason. Brett Favre's first ever completion was to himself. Now this isn't his first ever pass, just his first completion. With his first pass ever, he wasn't even a Packer. He played 2 games for the Atlanta Falcons in 1991 during his rookie season. Emmitt Smith ran for exactly 937 yards in both his first season and his final season in 2004. The Saints' first ever touchdown was a kickoff return on their first attempt. In comparison, it took the Buccaneers 1,865 attempts, or 32 years, to get a kickoff return touchdown. Randy Moss never led the league in receiving yards. His best season for this stat, though, was in 2003 when he reached 1,632 receiving yards. Wes Welker does not have a Super Bowl ring despite playing for the Patriots from 2007 to 2012 and being one of Brady's best teammates. Tom Brady was drafted to the MLB before the NFL. Brady was drafted in the 18th round of the 1995 MLB draft as he was the 507th pick by the Montreal Expos. But to really put Tom Brady's career length into perspective, think about this. Calvin Johnson was drafted, played his whole career, and then inducted into the Hall of Fame, all while Tom Brady was an active NFL player. To make this more insane, Brady was drafted in 2000 and Megatron was drafted in 2007. The Cleveland Rams were the first team with a logo on their helmet, and then this team got replaced by the Cleveland Browns, who are the only team without a logo on their helmet. The Chargers had Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson on the same team and won 0 playoff games with them together. Tom Brady is older than the Buccaneers' first win. Tom was born on August 3rd, 1977. The Buccaneers got their first franchise win on December 11th, 1977. They had an 0-26 start to their franchise. And despite playing in 10 Super Bowls so far, Tom Brady has only completed 1 touchdown pass in the first quarter, and that was in his latest Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Peyton Manning and Eli Manning both have identical 87.4 career passer ratings in the playoffs. Man, these 2 could be brothers. Having the #1 defense and offense in terms of yards sounds great, right? Well, if you're the 2010 Chargers, it means nothing because they still missed the playoffs with these records. Bruce Smith, the all-time NFL leader in sacks, never once led the league in sacks in a single season. He has a total of 200 sacks. His closest was in 1990, where he had 19 sacks that season, but Derek Thomas had 20. There are 5 different outcomes for an NFL game, and in the first 5 games of the 2018 season, the Browns achieved each one. In their first game, they tied the Steelers 21-21. In their second game, they lost to the Saints. They won their third game, and in their fourth game, they had an overtime loss. Finally, in their 5th game, they had an overtime win. Not only did this all happen in the same season, it happened in the first 5 games of the same season, which is a tie, a loss, a win, an overtime loss, and an overtime win. The Vikings won a game in 1989 against the Los Angeles Rams, in which they scored 23 points, but did not score a touchdown. Kicker Rich Karlis made 7 field goals, 7 out of 7 attempts in regulation before Minnesota ended up winning 23-21 in overtime. Coincidentally, that was the first time an overtime game ended up in a safety. This is also the most points a team has scored in a game without scoring a touchdown. Tom Brady, since turning 42, had more top 10 defenses on his roster than Aaron Rodgers had for his entire career. Rodgers only had 2 top 10 defenses his whole career. Brady had 3 alone from ages 42 to 45. But to be fair to Brady, he did take many pay cuts and sacrifices to start his career to allow for a stronger roster. Rodgers throughout his career was one of the highest paid NFL players. Larry Fitzgerald played for 17 seasons and made 11 Pro Bowls. In that same 17-season time frame, his quarterbacks only made a combined total of 3 Pro Bowls. This man was doing a ton of heavy lifting. Patrick Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts was actually the youngest Super Bowl quarterback matchup, edging out Joe Montana versus Dan Marino. Joe Looney weighed roughly 120 pounds or 54 kilograms by the time he was just 6 years of age. Jerome Bettis, who's a running back, once got 3 touchdowns on 5 attempts but only ran for 1 yard in that very game. This happened against the Raiders in 2004. Tom Brady has roughly a 67 win percentage when attempting 50 or more passes in a game. The NFL average for quarterbacks is a win percentage of only 20% when they throw for 50 or more passes. Defense is important because the 2016 Saints had the most yards of a total offense by a team that year with 6,816 yards and averaged an amazing 29.3 points per game. But they went 7-9. They're one of the greatest offenses in NFL history with a losing record. Again, defense is important. Winning outside of your division is also important because the 2010 Raiders went undefeated 6-0 within their own division, but were 2-8 outside of the AFC West, and then they missed the playoffs by going 8-8 that season. Take a look at this crazy stat from the 2007 Patriots. At that point in their season, they were dead last in possessions, yet first in touchdowns, with a touchdown efficiency percentage of 50%. The NFL average at the time was only 20%. Jacoby Brissett has the lowest interception percentage of all time with at least 500 pass attempts. He has a career 1.5%. Sammy Baugh once threw 4 touchdowns as a quarterback and had 4 interceptions as a safety, all within the same game. He's also the first NFL player in history to intercept 4 passes regardless of position, yet he did it while also playing as a quarterback. He accomplished this against the Lions on November 14th, 1943. Rest in peace to Sammy Baugh. Marvin Harrison is the only receiver to catch a pass in every NFL game he played in. He played in 190 games. What's even crazier is that he's still 84 games short of Jerry Rice's record for the most consecutive games with a catch. Jerry's record is 274 consecutive games with catching. The 1983 Redskins featured 2 active league MVPs on the same roster. The 1982 MVP Mark Mosley at kicker and the 1983 MVP Joe Theismann at quarterback. Mosley is the only kicker so far to win the MVP award. The Cleveland Browns have 0 Super Bowls so far, but they do have 4 NFL championships. The last time a team scored exactly 2 points was in 2013. Sammy Baugh led the NFL in passing, punting, and defensive interceptions all within the same season. Rest in peace to Sammy Baugh. 2005 Larry Johnson was quite the player. He only started in 9 games, but in those 9 games, he had 1,750 rushing yards and 20 touchdowns. During the Super Bowl era, NFL teams are 401-0, undefeated when scoring 40 points in a game without a single turnover. Well, actually, I should scratch that. I should say they were undefeated because the Browns broke that 401 game win streak back in 2021 in the 47-42 loss to the Los Angeles Chargers. In 2022, the Jets had 2 Michael Carters, Bryce and Breece Hall, and Quincy and Quinnen Williams. And in this upcoming season, the Jets are going to have Aaron Rodgers, which does not seem real to me yet. Ron Stark is the only player to have played for the Baltimore Colts and then against the Baltimore Ravens. He was a punter for the Baltimore Colts just before the team relocated to Indiana in 1984, and then in 1996, he signed with the Panthers. Then in Week 15, he punted against the Ravens. He even punted against the Ravens in 1997 in Memorial Stadium, but as a member of the Seattle Seahawks. Speaking of the Seahawks, they were founded in the same year the Rubik's Cube was invented, back in 1974. The Eagles were the first NFL team to play their home games on artificial turf. In 1999, Sam Gash made a Pro Bowl as a running back without a single carry in the season. And yes, he did play fullback throughout his career, but the Pro Bowl does not acknowledge the difference between the two positions, and still, he had 0 carries for that regular season. That's the magic of lead blocking for you. In 2014, when the Patriots beat the Raiders, all points scored by both teams were scored by someone with the suffix last name of Kowski. For example, there were points scored from Sebastian Janikowski, Rob Gronkowski, and Steven Gostkowski. The Kowskis were the only players who scored points that game. In 2012, backup quarterback Matt Flynn became the first Packers quarterback to score 6 touchdowns in a single game. Flynn threw for 480 yards and 6 touchdowns against the Detroit Lions, leading his Packers to a season-ending victory 45-41. And yes, Brett Favre did throw 6 touchdowns in a single game in 2008, but he was playing for the Jets by then. Lucky enough, Andrew Luck's first throw was a touchdown. Alvin Kamara has not rushed for 1,000 yards in a season yet so far. His career high is 932 yards in 2020. As far as total games are concerned, Jim Kelly is not the longest tenured Bills quarterback. He only played 160 games as QB. Joe Ferguson played 164 games. Tom Brady has played in more Super Bowls than he has faced the Browns in his entire career. He's been to 10 Super Bowls. He's only faced the Browns 9 times. The Browns beat Tom Brady twice, which is crazy. The quickest touchdown in NFL history took 3 seconds. This happened when Dallas beat the Eagles 23-31 all the way back in 2003. The Eagles tried an onside kick and it did not go well for them, as Randall Williams got a hold of that ball and scored. It technically took him 6 seconds to run 37 yards, but 3 seconds were only removed from the game clock, so by technicality, this was the quickest touchdown in NFL history. Darnell Dockett has pet alligators and a pet tiger named Buddy. The last Cleveland Browns coach to win on the Patriots' home field in Foxborough is the current Patriots coach, Bill Belichick. He beat the Patriots all the way back in September of 1991, coaching for the Browns. The Browns beat the Pats in that game 20-0. Tom Brady bought his first house from Ty Law. Andy Dalton was the only quarterback in NFL history so far to start a season 8-0 in 2015, and then years later in 2019 have a season in which he went 0-8. That 2019 season was his last year with the Bengals. Since Peyton Manning retired, the Broncos have not been able to beat the Chiefs. They are 0-14 against them, and Patrick Mahomes himself is 11-0 against Denver, which means there's 3 games in there in which they really have no excuses. The Vikings were the last team to win an NFL championship. As for the trophy itself, they misplaced the NFL championship trophy and they didn't know where it was for the longest time. The spirit of Ed Thorpe is rumored to have cursed the Vikings since they lost a trophy that was named in his honor. It is rumored that losing said trophy cursed them from ever winning a Super Bowl. I don't know if I actually believe that or not, but the trophy was found in the possession of the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame. Julio Jones was the first wide receiver to have 5 straight 1,400-yard seasons. Walter Payton, who is a running back, threw more passing touchdowns than Johnny Manziel. Payton threw 15 touchdowns, Johnny only threw 7. Rest in peace to Walter Payton. Matt Ryan became the first quarterback to have back-to-back games in which he had 350 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. He did this in 2018. He did it by losing to the Saints with 374 yards and then the Bengals with 419 yards. Worst of all, he also lost to the Browns in that season. Speaking of the Browns, Cleveland is the only NFL city so far that has neither hosted a Super Bowl or had their team play in one. But on a positive note, the 1977 Super Bowl pregame show had a dog catching frisbees. The Green Bay Packers have never won against the Bills in Buffalo on their home field like ever. They are 0-7 against the Bills in road games. Kurt Warner is the only undrafted player to win the AP MVP and Super Bowl MVP award. LeVar Ball, owner of the Big Baller brand and father of the NBA's Ball brothers, was a defensive end for the New York Jets, albeit for a short while, but still it's quite an amazing feat. Drew Brees went his entire career without being shut out in a start. Drew also did not play tackle football until he was in high school. It's fairly common knowledge that Jim Brown is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but did you know he was also in the Lacrosse Hall of Fame? LaDainian Tomlinson had a passer rating of 146.9 in his career. Adam Vinatieri became the first player to score 1,000 points for 2 different teams. He scored over 1,000 for the Patriots and over 1,000 for the Colts. He has a total of 2,673 points. He also once tackled Herschel Walker, which is pretty cool. Cam Newton is a pescatarian. Vita Vea became the heaviest player to get a receiving touchdown. He weighs roughly 346 pounds or 157 kilograms. Tom Brady was born with inverted nipples. Fewer than 5% of people are born with inverted nipples. Josh Gordon is the only wide receiver so far to receive 200 yards in back-to-back games. He did this back in 2013. He got a total of 498 yards in that two-game stretch, the most yards in a two-game stretch in NFL history for a wide receiver, all while playing for the Browns, which is the craziest fact of all. Bill Belichick is not in the Madden NFL games. He isn't a part of the NFL Coaches Association as he owns his own likeness. EA Sports instead uses fake characters as a replacement as head coaches for the Patriots. Jalen Hurts became the first player in NFL history with 500 pass yards and 150 rush yards in his first two career starts. Justin Tuck sacked Tom Brady twice in Super Bowl 42 and in Super Bowl 46. He's the only player to have at least 2 sacks in 2 different Super Bowls, and they were all towards the same quarterback who got sacked the second most times in his career, that being Tom Brady, who's been sacked 565 times, second to only Fran Tarkenton, who was sacked 572 times. The Detroit Lions once got a 66-yard penalty for a pass interference in 2016 in a loss against the Packers. The craziest part is that after the penalty, the referees later admitted that that was the wrong call, but by then it was already too late. Though, to be fair, it's not like this was going to make or break the 2016 Lions. But it still kind of sucks though. You don't want the wrong calls in any game under any circumstance, unless you're a fan of the opposing team, maybe. Jeff Eagles played the most consecutive games in NFL history, 352 total games without missing a single one. This was a stretch from 1988 to 2010, which lasted roughly 22 years. Jameis Winston became the first quarterback to throw 30 interceptions and 30 touchdowns in the same season. He did this in 2019.
LaDainian Tomlinson, who's a running back, has as many passing touchdowns as quarterback Johnny Manziel. They both have 7 passing touchdowns. So far, the Panthers have never had back-to-back winning seasons. They had a few single-season winning seasons, but could never hold a streak. However, in the same breath, from 2013 to 2014, they had their first back-to-back playoff seasons, which ironically made them the first team in NFC South history to win consecutive division titles, and they did all of that by technically having a losing season in 2014. Jim Brown's per-game average of 104.3 yards still stands today and is considered by many to be one of the NFL's most unbreakable records. Dan Marino played 17 seasons in the NFL, yet he only has a total of 87 career rushing yards. That's roughly 5 rushing yards per season. The Steelers have not beaten the Eagles in Philadelphia since 1965. Did you know LeBron played in the NFL? LeBron Shields, at least. Wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald has more tackles than drops. He made 41 tackles in his career, but only dropped 29 passes. If you're wondering how a wide receiver even gets tackles, it's usually after an interception. The Chicago Bears have not had the same quarterback start every game in consecutive seasons since 1977. Joe Webb still has the most career tackles by a quarterback with a total of 26. There have only been 2 teams to beat the Steelers at home twice in the same season. Those teams are the 2007 Jaguars and the 2017 Jaguars. So Jaguar fans, get ready for 2027, I guess. And since the Jaguars have joined the league in 1995, they have more playoff wins than the Dallas Cowboys in that time span. Throwing over 400 yards sounds awesome, unless your name is Ryan Fitzpatrick, because he did that once and still lost 16-3. The Vikings are undefeated all time on Leif Erikson Day, October 9th. A hinga-dinga-dargan. The Bears are the only NFL team without a quarterback that had a 4,000-yard passing season since the 16-game era started in 1978. It's been roughly 45 years. Their closest was Eric Kramer in 1995 when he passed for 38-38, 3,838 yards. Jay Cutler also has some upper-ended 3,000-yarded seasons, but no one in Bears history during the 16-season schedule has ever surpassed 4,000. In 1985, Joe Montana led the NFL with a 61.3% completion percentage. If he were to throw that same 61.3% in the 2022 season, he would be tied at 28th place towards the bottom. He'd be tied with Marcus Mariota, who also threw 61.3%. First place for 2022 was Geno Smith, who threw 69.9%. Nice. X-Man O'Shane Ximines is the only NFL player all time so far with a last name that starts with the letter X. Jerry Rice and Emmitt Smith are the only non-kickers who scored over 1,000 points in their career.
The last NFL player born from Vermont and played in the NFL was Steve Wisniewski, who was born in 1967 and played from 1989 through 2001. Not to be confused with Eagles legend Stefan Wisniewski, who was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is Steve Adam Wisniewski. Since that Steve, there have been no Vermont NFL players. It's been roughly over 20 years. And speaking of 2001, Tom Brady back in 2001 fell asleep in his locker room moments before his first Super Bowl. He himself stated that he laid down to take a nap and then dozed off, woke up with just a few minutes left to spare, but it didn't stop him from winning that Super Bowl. We all know John Elway is great at football, but did you know he was drafted 52nd overall by the New York Yankees all the way back in 1981?
Big Ben won a Super Bowl with the lowest passer rating.
Wow.
Joe Theismann changed the way he pronounced his last name from Theismann to Theismann because Theismann rhymes with Heisman, aka the Heisman Trophy. Eli Manning has 0 regular season AP MVP votes in his entire career, not a single vote. The Seahawks are the only NFL team to not wear white jerseys during home games. So far in his career, Quentin Nelson has been a part of 5,000 snaps. Of those snaps, he only got 31 penalties and just 9 sacks allowed. That means there is less than a 0.001% chance of your quarterback getting sacked if he's guarding for you. Tom Brady is the first player in NFL history to make the playoffs for at least 12 straight times in a row. More NFL kickers have won the AP MVP award than wide receivers. That's because no wide receiver has ever won the award. Jerry Rice is probably the closest to ever winning one. Peyton Manning has played in 4 Super Bowls. Only once did he throw a touchdown in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl, and that throw was actually an interception. The 1992 NFL Draft was the first and only draft so far where the number 1 overall and number 2 overall picks belonged to the same team, that team being the Colts. Cam Newton was the first NFL player in history with 4,000 passing yards and 500 rushing yards in the same season. In 2010, the Raiders swept their own division yet still missed the playoffs. They were 6-0 against the AFC West, but 0-4 against the AFC South. By technicality, the Browns paid Baker Mayfield over $500,000 to face the Browns in Week 1 of 2022. But the more things change, the more things stay the same. He got paid by the Browns to lose, which he still did. Chad Johnson lived in the Bengals stadium for 2 years to save money. When he first started playing for the Cincinnati team, he thought it'd be a great idea to save up that cash and live where he works. It's been over 50 years since the Saints drafted any quarterback in the first round. The last time they did it was when they drafted Archie Manning in 1971 as the 2nd overall pick in the first round. John Elway and Dan Marino were drafted to the MLB in the same year to the same MLB team. The Kansas City Royals drafted both of them in 1979. The Chargers drafted both Eli Manning and Drew Brees and won Super Bowls with 0 of them. Both these quarterbacks went on to win Super Bowls for other teams. For reference on how rare it is to draft Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, only 9 teams in NFL history have managed to draft multiple Super Bowl winning QBs. It's a little easier to sign for one or trade for one, but imagine drafting multiple Super Bowl winning QBs and winning none with them. Patrick Mahomes and Tim Tebow are the only 2 quarterbacks drafted in the first round by an AFC West team and won a playoff game for said team. And before you say anything, Philip Rivers and John Elway were traded to their AFC West teams before their rookie season started. The Jets have lost 8 straight primetime games and may be counting. This is the longest active primetime losing streak currently in the NFL. During the 10-year span from 2009 to 2019, the New Orleans Saints went either 13-3, 11-5, or 7-9. These are the only 3 records they had for those years. There are only 2 starting quarterbacks with more wins than rushing yards, Dan Marino and Kenny Stabler. Dan has 87 rushing yards and 147 wins. Ken has 93 rushing yards and 118 wins. Joe Burrow has equal the amount of playoff wins as every other Bengals quarterback all-time combined. He has 5 alone, and every other Bengals QB has a total of 5 combined. In 1985, during Super Bowl 20, the Patriots suffered their first loss in their first ever Super Bowl appearance. The Bears beat them 46-10, which gives the Pats a point differential of -36. Fast forward 10 Super Bowls later, the Patriots' point differential is still -36. Basically, in all 11 of the Patriots' Super Bowls so far, their opponents put up a total of 282 points, and the Patriots only put up 246 points. What this means is that the Patriots lost to the Packers, Giants, and Eagles by the same amount of total points that they beat all the other teams by. In other words, it's pretty difficult to have the same exact point differential in a near half century facing 11 different teams, yet the Patriots somehow did it. Brandon Weeden is older than Aaron Rodgers, despite Brandon being drafted in 2012 and Aaron drafted in 2005. The Houston Oilers have won 2 division titles in 1991 and 1993, more recently than the Cleveland Browns have won one in 1989. In the Super Bowl era, the lowest scoring playoff game took place during the 1970 divisional round match when the Cowboys beat the Lions 5-0. The Steelers have more playoff games at Ford Field in Detroit than the Lions do themselves. As far as postseason passer ratings go, Mark Sanchez has a playoff passer rating of 94.3. That 94.3 is higher than Tom Brady's, Troy Aikman, Peyton and Eli Manning's, who have equivalent passer ratings, Big Ben, and Brett Favre. Bill Belichick was a part of every single Giants Super Bowl victory, whether he was coaching for them like he did in the late 80s, early 90s, or against them in the 2000s/2010s. He was on the turf for all 4 championships. In the 2012 NFL Draft, Robert Griffin was drafted 2nd overall in the 1st round to the Washington Redskins, and Robert Griffin was also drafted in the 6th round 203rd overall to the New York Jets. In the 14-game era of the NFL, only one quarterback passed over 4,000 yards, and that's the Jets with Joe Namath in 1967 as he got 4,007 yards. On the flip side, the Jets are one of 2 teams, the second being the Bears, to have 0 quarterbacks pass over 4,000 yards in the 16-game era. Wes Welker, who's mainly known as a wide receiver, actually earned a field goal and a kick extra point before he ever caught a pass in the NFL. He recorded his first kickoff, field goal, and points in the AFC on October 10th, 2004. Speaking of Wes Welker, he has the toughest Super Bowl luck. Think about it. He spent roughly 7 years with Tom Brady and 2 years with Peyton Manning. In this time frame, he's been to 3 Super Bowls. In each Super Bowl, he lost, but eventually, both teams won the Super Bowl without him once he was no longer on the roster. To continue on with this, he was recently the 49ers wide receiver coach in 2019. Yes, that's the same season in which the 49ers lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. So if you want to see your favorite team make the Super Bowl, then hire Wes Welker, but you know what's coming next. On November 3rd, 1996, The Simpsons made a joke mocking the Dallas Cowboys by using the Denver Broncos. Since then, the Cowboys have never been able to beat the Broncos yet. The Broncos currently have a 7-game win streak since 1996 over the Cowboys. And it goes beyond regular season matchups if you really look into it, because the Cowboys' last Super Bowl was January of 96, while the Broncos immediately after this episode aired went on to win back-to-back Super Bowls. From 1960 to 1969, nice, the NFL had a 3rd place game, aka the Playoff Bowl, which is basically a game between the losers who couldn't make it into the championship game and lost a semifinal match, so they had to play this game, which all the events took place in Miami, and the main goal of this game was to raise funds for retirement pensions for the league. This Orange Bowl was no fan of the orange and brown, as the Cleveland Browns have the most losses in the Playoff Bowl, going 0-3, which is not really surprising. This is the Cleveland Browns, and this is coming from a Browns fan. But to end on a positive Browns fact, the Browns do have a playoff win more recently than the Detroit Lions, which I don't know if that's impressive or embarrassing for the Lions, but you decide that one. The 2022 NFL Draft was the first NFL draft in which no running backs or tight ends were drafted in the 1st round. From the years 1994 to 2016, quarterbacks drafted in the 6th round have the highest win percentage, highest playoff win percentage, and 2nd most playoff wins compared to all other draft rounds. This is all thanks to Tom Brady, who was drafted in the 6th round. In Tom Brady's entire career, that's over 350 starts, his defense has not allowed 44 plus points once, ever in his entire career. In Aaron Rodgers' 10 playoff losses, that's just 10 starts, his defense allowed 44 plus points 3 times. In the first 54 Super Bowls, no Super Bowl team won or played at their home stadium for the Super Bowl match. Then it happened twice in a row during Super Bowl 55 and Super Bowl 56. The New England Patriots almost became the St. Louis Stallions. The Pats were supposed to relocate to St. Louis in 1994, as that's where the team owner, Orthwein, wanted them to be, since he is a St. Louis native. However, the owner of the Foxborough Stadium, Robert Kraft, forced a stadium lease that ran through the year 2001, which eventually resulted in the Patriots staying in New England long term. The Steelers joined the NFL in 1933, but from the years 1933 through 1972, they only played in one postseason game in 1947 when they lost to the Eagles 21-0, shutout style. The longest gap from thrower to receiver with the same set of players is 18 years. This is when Brett Favre threw a pass to Brett Favre in Brett Favre's first ever NFL completion on September 13th, 1992, and then again in 2009 when Favre caught another of his own pass, which was a 2-yard loss. The Jags are undefeated when they play their final game at home. They are 9-0 undefeated so far when the last game on their schedule is at home. They are also the only active NFL team to have never played on Thanksgiving Day. The Philadelphia Eagles are the only team to win a playoff game against Vince Lombardi when he was an NFL head coach. In 2016, you had more NFL rushing yards than Reggie Bush did. You had 0, he had -3, assuming you're not in the NFL or not Reggie Bush watching this.